Henry, the philosophy of materialism, that only the physical is real and nothing else but the physical truly exists, is a philosophy that, as a trained scientist, I have been taught to believe and appreciate, although internally within me, I've always hoped for something more, although my training has led me to believe that such hope is a wan one at best. You've talked about something called quantum interactive dualism, and I really want to find out what that is, because maybe it can defeat materialism.
Did you really mean to say exist or do something? Because I think most people would say that thoughts exist, and the conceptual idea of material universe, I mean, that's billiard balls bouncing off each other, and the field has a certain value at each point. And within that conceptual structure, you don't see anything that resembles a feeling or a thought or an idea. All you have is just something that's described completely in material terms. So I think most people would say that you do have feelings, and logically a feeling is not contained in the idea of the physical world. In fact, the way Newton set up his physical world, what Descartes had called the res cogitans, I mean the realm of thought and ideas, just was not part of the structure at all, and so it's logically outside. And,
well, I think,
but then most people think it exists.
Well, I'm not sure first of all, what most people feel or think doesn't make it right. People thought the earth was flat. People thought that there were spirits in trees and who knows what. So what I'm concerned about is what's real, not what people think. And what science has shown is that a lot of the feelings that we have are just a result of brain functions in different ways. If you have a feeling that you see so-called stars because somebody hit you on the head, it's because you had a brain, some kind of trauma.
Well, there's no...
You press on your eye, you see a color because there's a physiological effect.
No, but there's no logical connection between the feel. You know, in brain physiology or neurophysiology, you're talking about relationships between physiologically described things.
Yes.
And but the fact that a star appears or something like this is an empirical fact, but there's no logical reason that experience should be associated with this particular physiological activity. So I think you have to distinguish the idea of just the existence of an experience. There's no logical reason for the experience to exist because a certain physiological activity occurs within classical mechanics.
Now, we have this causal linkage between things that happen and things that we experience in terms of doing things to our brain or a body that causes different experiences to be sensed.
There are certainly correlations between your thoughts and what's going on in your brain. Everybody agrees to that.
Right.
And, but I'm just trying to distinguish the word exist from the word causal connection. I'm trying to distinguish those two because I think the important thing is the causal connection between these two. Is there a causal connection? And within a classical worldview, there's the physical description by itself, without ever talking about a field or a star or something like this, is already causally complete, and there's no room for a conscious experience to enter in.
And this is the argument, this is exactly the argument that many scientists use to show that there is nothing but the physical. I mean, that is the materialistic argument, that the material world is a complete system. You don't need anything else. And causally, it's a complete system causally, right, and it all works together well. Right. And out of this, for some reason, we think we have a feeling or a sensation of color and whatever, but it's just a product of this physical world all working together.
Well, John Searle calls this the idea that just like the liver excretes bile, the brain excretes consciousness.
Yeah, I've heard it with kidney and urine, but yours is more polite.
Maybe it was the other way around. But in any case, William James, in fact, as far as the kidney and the bile, that was his example. And he said there's a huge difference, of course, between these two. They're not analogous at all, because the bile is described in the same physiological terms, and it has an effect, whereas the conscious experience is not described in terms of positions of particles. It's described as an experience. It's described in totally different terms. So there's not a good analogy there between the brain excreting consciousness and the liver excreting bile. There seem to be two quite different things. And
I can almost argue it both ways, but let's continue the process.
In any case, the main thing I think is the issue of causal connection. I mean, I would like to say that I think most people will admit that you have conscious experiences, and nobody can understand why a conscious experience is exactly the same thing as a motion of particles moving around.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So there's a mystery there, and let's say that both of them, certainly experiences exist, certainly brain activities exist, and so they both exist. The question is there a causal connection between them, and if so, what is it, and how does it work? And if you believe classical mechanics, then there's just no room for a causal connection.
And materialism is absolutely right.
If you believe that materialism is right, if you accept that, then there's no causal role for consciousness to play.
And therefore, if what you're saying, I think, is if classical mechanics is the only system, then materialism is the right philosophy, and that only the physical world exists, and consciousness plays no role.
Well, you keep saying exist, I would say. Let's talk about the causal connection.
Causal connection, okay. Okay.
So, if you accept classical mechanics, and you believe it is the ultimate truth, then consciousness does not really play a causal role.
Fine.
It's what they call epiphenomenalism.
Right.
And consciousness doesn't do anything. So, but why do you believe classical mechanics? Why should a brain scientist believe classical mechanics? If you look at what's going on in your brain, a lot of what's going on in your brain has to do with nerve impulses, and we have nerve terminals that calcium ions flow in, and they release neurotransmitter and all these things that neuroscientists talk a lot about, neurophysiologists. And at this lowest level, you've got to treat these quantum mechanically. That can actually be shown. These ion channels are so narrow that the uncertainty principle causes these things to flare out
in the brain, right?
So you're going to have uncertainty at the bottom level. And if you have uncertainty at the bottom level, the way nonlinear systems work, you're going to have huge uncertainties when it bubbles up to a macroscopic level. So quantum mechanics says you've got to treat the brain as a quantum system. Now, it's true that neuroscientists think they have good reasons for understanding it in classical terms, but that can be understood within quantum mechanics, why classical ideas work as well as they do. But the underlying issue still remains about the causal connections. Once you've gotten rid of classical mechanics and say it's no longer valid, then you don't have a good reason to say that consciousness cannot do anything. And in fact, if you look at quantum mechanics, you find that an essential element of quantum mechanics is an input from the psychological realm into the physical realm. And that's what Bohr calls the choice on the part of the experimenter as to what.
So materialism says no matter what you call consciousness, it exists, doesn't exist, it in fact is reducible to this one thing that really exists, which is the material world. So what I want to understand is the chain of logic that you would use with quantum mechanics and consciousness to defeat this materialistic, only one thing exists, everything is reduced to material.
So, as you've just said, the materialist philosophy, worldview, says that consciousness, whatever it is, doesn't do anything. It's inert. It's passive. It's causally ineffective. And so, insofar as you accept classical mechanics, that's the end of the story. And these people, these neuroscientists, are basically right, and you can't get around it. But why does a neuroscientist believe classical mechanics controls the brain? If you look at the details of what's going on in the brain, the nerve terminals and the flows of calcium ions in through ion channels and all these things that neurophysiologists talk about, at the bottom level, the processes are quantum mechanical. And in nonlinear systems, any uncertainties at the lower level magnify, and so in principle, you've got to treat the brain quantum mechanically.
Okay, so what are the implications of that?
And if you treat the brain quantum mechanically, then you can look and see the quantum mechanical generalizations of the laws of classical mechanics. And all they do is determine potentialities for some event to happen. In order to make quantum mechanics work, you've got to have questions posed. And there's nothing in the laws of quantum mechanics, as we know them today and as they're applied, that determine what chooses the question. What chooses the question?
And that's where you add consciousness.
And in actual practice, the thing that chooses the question, and the way it's used in practice, is the experimenter has reasons for doing this and not that. There's a psychological process that causes him to do this and not that. So the way quantum mechanics actually gets around this